Guess what? Today you're going to get to know your cookie dough so that from now on you can make your cookies exactly the way you love them the most. But whoops, I'd already been up to my ankles in creating this video before I added a poll to my community page where an overwhelming majority voted least popular for this type of video. But I worked really hard on it, so try to stay with me. You'll learn something. Have you ever wondered how you can get exactly the kind of cookie that you love, whether it's thin and crispy or soft and chewy, or maybe a little bit of all of those things? Well, today I'm going to show you how you can achieve that simply by tweaking a couple of ingredients in your recipe. And today we're using the good old Wakefield original Toll House cookie chocolate chip cookie recipe for our control and for all of the various experiments. But before we get to the recipes, I just love the story of how the chocolate chip cookie recipe was born and how it came to be America's most iconic cookie. It all started back in the 1930s. Ruth Wakefield, a former home economics teacher who ran the successful Toll House restaurant in Whitman, Massachusetts, invented the now world-famous cookie. In 1939, Ruth sold Nestle the rights to reproduce her recipe on all of its packages, supposedly for only about $1. Hey, that's what I make on each video, even today. With the popularity of this recipe, Nestle began pre-scoring its chocolate bars for easy baking. And then in 1941, they introduced Toll House real semi-sweet chocolate morsels, which became the chocolate chips we all know today, with Ruth's original recipe still printed on the package. And most likely, this is the recipe that you all follow today. Of course, we now make them egg and dairy free so that everyone can enjoy them. So let's get back to the topic of discussion, the various versions of the chocolate chip cookie. But first things first, since we egg-free peeps are taking the eggs out of our recipes, we have to first decide what will be the best egg replacer to do this job. In a cookie recipe, the egg acts mainly as a binder that also adds moisture to the recipe and some fat from the yolk. Now, my favorite egg replacer for cookies is aquafaba, which is very simply bean water. This bean water has a similar protein structure as the egg white, and I like to mix mine with a little bit of cornstarch and some flax meal for super binding properties and a touch of healthier fat from the flax. Also known as super egg, this is one awesome combination for egg-free cookie baking. But because eggs are also responsible for some light puffing action in a cookie dough, I'm also adding a bit of baking powder to the flour in the recipe as well. Keep your pants on, we're getting to the recipes. This is important information here. Chocolate chip cookie recipes typically use two kinds of sugar, both white granulated sugar and light brown sugar. White sugar will lend crispiness while brown sugar lends moisture. It's important to note that brown sugar is almost always measured as packed, meaning that you'll press the sugar firmly into the cup measure versus simply scooping. Additionally, since vegan sugar tends to be larger granules than the non-vegan white sugar, I'm going to whiz mine up in a food processor just to break down the size of that grain. I really want this to be as close as possible to the original Toll House recipe. Now, regarding flour, what kind of flour was Ruth using? Well, in the 1800s and the early 1900s, households used stone ground flour until steel roller mills came along in the early 1930s, and then into the 40s, mass-producing flour was the norm. All-purpose flour is merely a blend of hard and soft wheat flours, cake flour and bread flour. And bakers have long been blending their own ratios of both of those flours, making their own all-purpose blends. So I'm going to take a wild guess that Ruth, being the home baking alchemist that she was doing the same thing in her home kitchen. So AP it is. All right, probably the most important ingredient in any recipe for that matter is vegan butter. Vegan butter has natural oils derived from various nuts and seeds and fruits like olive and flax and coconut, whereas margarine is made from a mixture primarily of water, vegetable oil, and emulsifiers to achieve a smooth and spreadable texture like butter. Although you can use margarine interchangeably in your recipes, your results just won't be as good. So try to find a good quality vegan butter versus margarine that doesn't contain a lot of water. All right, we are almost there. So next we have baking soda, and this is the main raising agent in the cookie recipe. And you may have seen this done before, but Ruth practiced dissolving the baking soda in a teaspoon of water. Why do we do this? Well, baking soda starts working when it comes into contact with heat and also liquid. So by dissolving it first in hot water, this sort of kickstarts its action, particularly a good idea for cookies that aren't in the oven for very long. Nowadays, you'll see most cookie recipes call for a combination of both baking soda and baking powder, which we seem to have gravitated towards adding it along with the dry ingredients instead of dissolving it first. So why should we add both? Well, I for one like to add both, particularly in a cookie recipe because sometimes cookies spread too much just from using baking soda, and baking powder raises the batter, so a combination of the two is a great way to get the best of both worlds. And like I said earlier, without the eggs in our recipes now, we do need an extra boost, and baking powder gives a great subtle boost. All right, now we're ready to mix. The method for making cookies is what is called creaming method. A good practice is to have all your ingredients at room temperature before beginning, and the butter should be firm yet pliable and definitely not droopy or melty. The vegan butter with both sugars gets creamed with an electric mixer on medium to high speed until it gets light and fluffy, and this usually takes about 3 to 5 minutes. This mix method incorporates air into the dough, helping the cookies to rise and puff and become lighter as they bake. But be warned that overcreaming or too soft of a butter can result in a cookie that spreads way too much. All right, next the egg replacer goes in, and then give it a good whip to emulsify, scraping the sides and the bottom of the bowl often to ensure an even mix. Now, since we are following Ruth's original recipe, we will be adding the baking soda dissolved with the water, alternately with the sifted flour that also has the salt added to it. The chocolate chips go in next, except I prefer using chopped couverture chocolate instead of chips, which, if you remember, is the way Ruth did it in the first place before chocolate morsels were even invented. Now, nuts are definitely in the original recipe, but for those with nut allergies or just plain don't like them, leave them out. Last, the vanilla extract, and there you go. The original Toll House recipe for chocolate chip cookies. Oh my God, how dare you? These are vegan. You can't call this original. Now, the way they did it back in the day was to drop the dough by rounded teaspoons onto a baking sheet. But since this isn't 1940 anymore, and we are super spoiled with all our fancy schmancy gadgets and tools, I have to use my cookie scooper for perfect round balls of dough. And a side note, apparently Ruth's cookie recipe made teensy tiny cookies because she said that it made 100 cookies. Well, I'm definitely not making 100 cookies, but cookies do freeze really well, and I'm going to pre-scoop half of this dough onto a sheet pan and freeze the dough balls for like up to a month or even 2 months so I can have fresh baked cookies anytime. But for now, my oven is preheated to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. This is not convection, just regular oven, and they take about 12 minutes to bake. To perfect golden brown, the original Toll House chocolate chip cookie recipe veganized, and it's just as good, if not better. This is perhaps the most perfect cookie. It is ever so subtly crisp with soft, chewy insides. It's no wonder this recipe has stood the test of time for almost 100 years. So we could stop here, but why not continue on with this awesome experiment? Because what if you want thick and chubby and chewy soft batch cookies like I do? This is hands down my favorite way of making cookies. All the ingredients are exactly the same, but this time we are melting the butter instead of implementing the creaming method, and I'm using bread flour instead of all-purpose. The resulting cookie is thick and soft and chewy, almost brownie-like in texture. And it's really all about the protein levels in your flour, which makes all the difference. Essentially, the higher protein content in flour means that it's going to absorb more liquid from your recipes than those with less protein. Cookies made with melted butter often become denser when they cool, resulting in a perfectly cooked fudgy center, not raw or undercooked, but thick and chubby, just the way I like them. Not to mention, you don't need an electric mixer to make this recipe. So again, all of the ingredients are the same, but as you can see, I'm just mixing it all in a large mixing bowl with a whisk and a spatula. The only difference really is that this dough has to be chilled for just about 15 minutes to make them easier to scoop before I bake them. All right, this brings us to the last experiment, and that is using cake flour instead of all-purpose flour. Cake flour has the lowest protein, therefore it absorbs liquids the least. So in a recipe like this one, this type of flour is actually going to give you a crispier cookie. Unlike what you may expect, hence the name cake flour, it really doesn't give you a cakey texture. I know it's difficult to tell from just looking at these various batches of cookies, since they all really do look very similar on the outside, but the true test is in the taste and the inside. So all you have to do now is decide which cookie variety you like best, then head over to my website at gretchensveganbakery.com and grab the recipe. All right, everyone, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, happy vegan baking. Bye for now.